So you
Okay.
study a lot, at least your article, you were studying the food on college campuses, the fast food, the vending machines, the sodas, what it does to students and the planet. But if a friend who'd never really thought twice about campus food asked you to explain what you were actually studying in 1 to 2 sentences, how would you put it?
That's a challenge. I guess I would say that I'm interested in how the campus food and beverage environment influences student food and beverage choices and how those choices influence health, student health specifically, but also social health and the environment.
Yeah, so you started really in genetics and agricultural anthropology. You worked with a lot of farmers around the world. How did that end up turning your lens onto your own university's dining halls and convenience stores? And is that shift still changing you? Is it still driving you?
Yeah, as you said, I started off my PhD research was with a year and a half work with farmers in northern Ghana. And one of the things that I realized in that research was that those farmers, they work so hard and they grow most of all the food they eat, and they grow most of that food. And they live in a very difficult growing environment and they worked out ways of getting that food, coaxing that food out of that environment, and yet they still experienced hunger season almost every year and famines sometimes. And I puzzled over why is this? These people are working hard. They really have these ingenious ways of getting food out of their environment. And I realized that one of the major things was the cause of this was the total world environment. In other words, the climate change was beginning to affect them, even though they didn't contribute to that climate change. The colonial occupation of that part of Africa destroyed a lot of their traditional social coping mechanisms. And so I realized that to understand the local problem, you needed to really back out to the global level.
Yeah, so when you walk across your own campus, what do you actually see in the food environment, and why does that picture bother you more, bothers most other people walking by?
Yeah, I think we have become so used to the ubiquitous presence of food and beverage advertising by for-profit companies that we don't notice it anymore. I mean, you drive down the main streets of many towns in this country, and as I'm sure you're aware, they're inundated with fast food restaurants that mainly sell food that's unhealthy and environmentally unsustainable. And so we've just come used to that. We've become so used to that. More than about 50% of all food eaten in this country is eaten outside of the home, which means that people are buying mostly junk food to eat. And I think students, when they come to campus, they see something that's the stuff that they see every day off campus. And so our campus food and beverage environments basically reflect the food and beverage environments in the United States as a whole. And that's why students, other faculty, staff don't really take it as exceptional. What I see is that this is on a college campus whose mission is to educate, to do research, to understand our world that we live in. And yet, that educational research approach is not evident in the food and beverage environment.
Yeah, so a lot of universities talk about food insecurity and they try to fix it by just handing out more food, but you argue that it really misses the point. So what's the problem with only asking whether students have enough to eat instead of what they're eating?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is a movement now to look more at nutritional security rather than just food security. In other words, looking at how adequate the food is. But still, the predominant approach is to say, do they have enough food? And not thinking, not do they have enough calories, enough protein, and not thinking about the food that those calories and protein are delivered in. And just looking at increasing the amount of food, if it's the kind of food that predominates on campus, it's not going to solve the underlying health problem. We're all becoming increasingly aware, our total food supply is not healthy, and we're experiencing an epidemic, a pandemic of non-communicable diet-related diseases like obesity, diabetes, cancers, coronary heart disease, liver disease, dental disease, and so on, which are all related to what we eat and drink.
Yeah. You also write that most campus food environments are shaped a lot by business deals, not really health. And you point to the soda, call them pouring rights contracts that almost no student knows exist. So what are those and what would surprise people about how they work?
Pouring rights contracts are contracts between institutions. It can be hospitals, sports teams, or whatever. But what I'm concerned with is the contracts between higher education institutions, our colleges and universities, and predominantly Coca-Cola or PepsiCo. And these are what are called revenue generating contracts, which means it's not just a contract that the university has with the company to purchase their product. The company actually pays a dividend, a supplement, a cash bonus to the campus for basically for access to the students because beverage companies know there's research showing that students at these ages at which they're on college campuses, those are ages in which young people begin to establish their food and beverage eating habits. And they're at a time when these habits are established in terms of brand loyalty. And Coke and Pepsi are fighting over brand loyalty. If they can establish a pattern of beverage consumption on campus, they expect that some of those students will continue that pattern throughout their lives, which is a revenue stream for these companies. So what I see in these pouring rights contracts is that the campuses are selling access to students to companies for a little bit of cash, and the companies get access to their students to sell their product, promote brand loyalty, and that this goes against what the campuses say their mission is, which is to promote the student health. If you look on the website of practically any higher education institution, you will find these wonderful statements. And I'm sure many of your peers, when they start applying to campus, to college, they will look on the websites of whatever campus and they'll see these wonderful statements about the University of X, Y, and Z promotes student health. We are interested in our planetary sustainability and these great statements, and they do a lot to implement those, but they also do some things that go directly against that. And so that's what I see when I walk across campus. I see these conflicts, underlying problems that most people don't see.
Yeah, I was actually just about to ask you about those mission statements, so I'm glad you covered those. The core of your argument is that we need to consume less, not just swap one product for a healthier one that still gets sold hard. So why is the buy the better version actually not a
Oh,
solution here?
Ari, this gets to a basic issue that we all need to learn more about, and that is, I start off that article, and I'm very aware of how overarching the issue of the Anthropocene crisis. We are now in a period of human impact on the planet that is incredibly huge compared with anything in our in human history. And climate change is probably the biggest one that people know about, but we're also in a huge planetary crisis in terms of our water supply, in terms of our air quality, in terms of our soil, in terms of biodiversity. And so this is what people call an existential crisis. It basically threatens the continued existence of our species at the rate it's going. And as in spite of all the commitments and meetings, our greenhouse gas emissions are still growing. And so I see this, the predominant response to this crisis is let's do it better. Let's produce, keep producing and consuming, but let's do it with less impact. But you can't zero out impact, which means that the more you consume, the higher that impact will go, even though it's going at a slower rate. And what we really need to do is reverse it. And that means decreasing growth. That means decreasing excess consumption. And that is really hard for people to get their heads wrapped around.
Yeah, I do like to ask this following question, and I was going to phrase it in a way of talking specifically about college campus food, but you can apply it to the overall. So, on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the most urgent, how worried should the average person be about the food on college campuses? Or you can apply the overarching, our climate, greenhouse gases.
As you can probably tell, I'm pretty biased, and I think we should be up on jumping off the 5 into the 6 in that scale because it is. I was just reading this morning about in the UK, for example, they've been recording bird songs in the morning between 1970s and current day, and there's been this huge reduction. They've lost like 70% of the birds in the UK already. And Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in the 60s was a wake-up call. Her Silent Spring is if we continue to use pesticides, we won't hear birds singing in the morning because they won't be there anymore. And her message was very impactful. We had great environmental legislation in the 70s, but today we're right back, as we're sure we're all aware of, destroying those very environmental protections that were put in place in the 70s are now being stripped away. I think that I'll give you an example on college campuses right now. There are some movements that let's have healthier food, but it's all driven by healthier food more of it. Let's consume more of it. And that's an example of how, oh, we can be more sustainable by consuming things that have less impact per unit. So we have beverages that are sparkling water with real fruit added. That's better than Pepsi or Coke with sugar, with added sugar. But if students are encouraged to drink more and more of that, then it's still increasing our impact. And I think this is the lesson that campuses need to have discussions about, and that is how can we move forward on campus and as a global society, how can we move forward to less consumption in order to save our planet and our society for the future?
Yeah, you put it very well phrased, but I like to follow up that with what's a specific thing that a student or anyone can actually do about the food environment around them that's going to make a real difference beyond just changing your own lunch.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have been working with students on the UCSB campus on food systems since probably about 2008 or so. And we have worked with dining staff, for example, to make some positive changes. But the dining staff are constrained by the policy of the campus overall. They only have so much wiggle room they can do. And students have been frustrated in trying to get these changes because the staff don't have the authority to make those kind of fundamental state changes. So I think one thing that students can do is just to inform themselves more about what are the actual campus policies around our food and our beverages, and what effect do they have on the environment, on health, and how can we as students increase the awareness of our fellow students and everyone else on campus. I think if that awareness gets high enough, then we can begin to have conversations on campus about what should we really be doing? What do we really want our campus to be doing in terms of the Anthropocene crisis, in terms of the health crisis? And I think that increasing awareness, I'm hopeful that it could lead to those kind of fundamental changes.
Yeah. So who are a few scientists or they can be thinkers who you think I should interview after you? They don't have to be directly.
Oh my gosh. I think you mean about this general topic, Ari?
They can be
Or
about food or just in the umbrella of environmental science in general.
oh,
Either works.
oh gosh, there's lots of and I know you've interviewed a number of people. I was just looking at some of the interviews that you've done with environmental scientists.
Yeah, I've interviewed, I think, three from University of California, Santa Barbara. I've interviewed Matt Petoskey, Stephen Gaines, and Gary Leibkap, so I've interviewed a few from
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there anyone else? I can send you an email afterwards, and I will be. If you'd like to, if you have any names then,
Yeah.
that's also
Yeah.
easy.
In terms of food sustainability, I'm part of a research consortium on food, beverages, and health at the University of California. And I can send you the link to that. And we have faculty members from all 10 UC campuses. We meet monthly, and one of the things we've done is to try to get the UCs to drop their pouring rights contracts, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. And one of the reasons for this that we didn't talk about is the increasing pressure on universities to raise income however they can. And public universities have seen over the last decades a dramatic drop in the amount of money they get from their states, so that they're being increasingly expected to find their own money. And so it's even though pouring rights contracts, for example, bring in way less than 1% of average annual campus budgets, they're part of an overall strategy of selling campus cachet, campus science, selling it to private corporations in return for income. And so I think we have forced, since the Reagan Thatcher revolution in the 80s, we have forced public institutions to become more privatized. And that is one of the underlying causes of our very commercialized campus food and beverage environments.
If every teenager on Earth had to hear one final sentence from you, what would it be?
Question authority.